Hi everyone, welcome to another workshop hosted to you by the Writing Support Center. My name is Genesis. I'm one of the faculty here in the Writing Support Center, and today we're presenting to you another reading skills workshop, specifically focusing on reading to write. So as a reminder to get the most out of this workshop, we ask that you complete the accompanying activity worksheet if you're receiving extra credit or completing this workshop as part of an assignment. Completing the worksheet is demonstration that you watched this video to its fullest. We also ask that you take your time. Feel free to pause and rewind parts that were confusing or went too fast. On today's agenda, we're going to be discussing what is reading to write, and then reviewing some reading strategies and some writing strategies. And as mentioned in the previous slide, we will have some activities for you to complete in order for you to demonstrate that you watched this workshop. So what is reading to write and how does it help? Reading to write is a strategy that you can use as you're reading articles or books for class that will help you prepare for your essay. So the goal of reading to write is to plan for your essay. You're selecting quotes that will potentially support arguments that you may have for your essay. You're also thinking about potential analysis. And the reason that this is something that is really helpful is because it helps guide your reading. So as opposed to just reading to get through the material, you have a guiding question or a guiding train of thought of what you're looking for. And that helps you get through the reading much quicker, and it also helps, again, just provide that guidance. It also helps with quicker recall of the information, so it's more likely to go into your long-term memory. It helps you keep track of any initial thoughts and reactions that could potentially be turned into future analysis in your essay. When you are writing your essay and integrating quotes, you don't have to reread the whole article to try to find any quotes that you felt were significant because you've already made a note of them. And I mean, it also helps you get a head start on the assignment. So that's always a great tip to have in your, or a great trick to have in your toolbox. So we're going to start out with the reflection activity. So on the worksheet provided for this workshop, type your response to the following reflection questions. So I want you to think about your reading and your writing process. Do you read with guided questions? Do you annotate the articles, journals, whatever it is that you're reading? If so, what do you find helpful of these strategies? If not, what makes them difficult to practice? So just take a couple moments to answer that question. All right, so we're going to start out by reviewing some reading strategies. And so these are strategies to do while you're reading articles for your paper or assignments. So the first one I'm going to recommend is to read/skim all of the reading. So this includes looking over the cover, title, intro, conclusion, any illustrations, etc. And this is all to just receive some quick information about the text. All of these little things can help you already have an idea of what the text is going to be about. And it just helps you go into the text with some knowledge already of what to expect. Also, be sure to identify the genre, what kind of reading is it, and why was it written. This helps give you purpose and guidance, again, as to what to expect when you're reading through the article or the book that you're reading. Also take into consideration about the author. So every writer writes with a purpose, and they write with biases, ideas, anything that's going to help convince you of their point of view. So what do you know and what can you learn about the author? What sources and methods did they use, and how does that inform their point of view? And again, this is all just for you to have this deeper understanding of the text that you're reading. Also think about, why did your instructor assign the reading? How does it fit with the class? So is it fitting a certain theme? Did your professor assign it to be in conversation with other articles that you're reading? Does it oppose other things that you're reading? Does it complement other things that you're reading and discussing? So always just think about that, because again, every article, everything that you're reading in class is chosen for a purpose. So you want to take into consideration, what could that purpose be? What is the role um, that this text is playing in your classroom? Always be sure to plan your reading. So schedule realistic time to read to stay on track. Uh, an example that I like to give is with poetry. A lot of folks think that because poetry is very short, um, it's easy to read, you maybe only need to account for 30 minutes. However, reading and understanding what you're reading are two different things. So you might need a little more time in order to be sure that you're understanding the material. So whether you're only having half a page of poetry, or whether you're having a 15-page article on sociology, you want to make sure that you're scheduling realistic time to stay on track of your reading and not feel overwhelmed. I always recommend that you contact a success coach for support to see how you can divide up that work. Be sure to record any reactions and questions. So write down any questions that come up so that you can remember or use them later. These questions can also be helpful for discussion. So in the classroom, when you guys are discussing the reading, these are questions that you can ask your professor so that they can provide some clarification. So yeah, just be sure to keep track of any initial reactions or questions that you may have, because it can come in handy during class discussions or in the future while you're writing your essay. You can use it for that too. Read with a friend. So split the reading, set goals together, share reactions. By working together, you're able to cover more reading with less work. And it also helps you um, expand your understanding of the reading, because if you're talking about your understanding with a friend, it's deepening your understanding. And if they are sharing with you their understanding and their point of view, you're also enhancing your reading, because now you're seeing it from someone else's perspective. So having that conversation can really help you better understand what you're reading, which of course is going to translate when you're writing about it, because the deeper you understand what you have read, the more in depth you can write about it in your essay. And then, of course, visit office hours. If you're having any questions about what you're reading, meet with your instructor to check for understanding and ask any questions that you may have. Always think about what's missing. So think about any issues, events, or ideas that weren't discussed and how it affects the argument. Um, like I said, every writer writes with an intention to persuade you of something. So if there is something missing, why do you think the writer didn't include it? And how do you think it would have affected their point of view if that information was brought up? And of course, read with the essay in mind. So if you know the essay prompt, so sometimes faculty will give you the prompt at the beginning of the unit. And if you know it, use those questions to guide your reading and prepare your answers. Because again, it just provides that guidance, and then you're just able to use those questions to help you look for any potential quotes that can support your argument, if you have an idea of how you want to answer that essay question. Right. So now we're going to go into our second activity. So again, complete the activity on the accompanying worksheet. And I want you to choose a reading from a class. Any class is fine. Read for about 10 minutes using two strategies that from the previous slides. Which strategies did you use? Did you feel they were helpful? Why or why not? Now we're going to talk about some writing strategies. So these are strategies to do while and after you read. So again, this is all just to put things into practice and to help deepen your understanding. So one is write as you read. So when you finish reading, when you finish the reading, write for about 5 minutes to record any thoughts, reactions, or questions that you may have. Again, just free write it. There's no need to think about making it perfect. You just want to get your initial thoughts down because eventually this is stuff that you can elaborate on for your essay. Keep any notes with the article. So if you're keeping notes, if you're writing them by hand, or if you're keeping them on in a notebook or on your laptop, just make sure that it's all close to the article for quick reference. So if you ever have to reference the article, you're able to reference your notes rather quickly. Share any informal writing. So, that previous activity of free writing for 5 minutes, share that with a friend, and then write a 5-minute response to one another about the reading. Again, it just helps deepen your understanding and you're getting a different perspective from someone else. And then you're also able to practice arguing and responding to someone else. Draw while you read. So draw any pictures, maps, or diagrams of issues that you see emerging. This all just helps you visualize what you are reading. So that way the reading isn't just words on a page, it becomes a little more concrete. React to the whole reading. So take time to free write your reactions to the reading as a whole. So whereas the previous strategy was more so for like those sections that you may have split up, this is for you to bring it all together and just rewrite your thoughts about how the writer built their argument, how they supported their argument, and whether or not you think that their argument is one that they supported thoroughly. Reread the assignment. So again, going back to the assignment, making sure that you understand it, so that way you can use it as a guide for any ideas or thoughts you might have. Plan out your essay. So work backwards from the deadline in order to give yourself enough time to write your essay. And when you're working backwards from the deadline, make sure to include one draft, time for any library or outside research, and time to receive feedback either from your instructor or a tutor, a friend, etc. We have a workshop in our Writing Center Canvas shell called Planning Your Essay. So if you would like more information on how to do this, we do have a workshop for that. Write a draft. Take some time to create a rough draft that you can receive feedback on to make improvements. Again, this will just help you refine your writing and you can see your strengths and then areas that need improvement, and you can add a little more to those areas. Also, if you end up having questions about your writing, maybe there's a certain paragraph that was really giving you a hard time, receiving feedback from a professor, a tutor, or a peer can help you make that area a lot stronger. Which goes into the next strategy, which is get feedback to see where you can improve on. And then finally, just make sure to proofread. Just make sure to proofread. Yes. So just make sure to take some time to proofread, spell check, all that good stuff to just make sure that your essay is reading as smoothly as possible. When you get a paper back, so after you've turned in your paper and your professor has returned it to you with comments, be sure to read through your instructor's feedback to assess your strengths and areas of improvement to inform your next assignment. So sometimes your professor's feedback is really great advice for how to focus and tailor your next assignment and really give you insight onto what you should work on for next time. You can also take your You can also take your comments to a tutor and ask a tutor, how can I improve on XYZ that my professor said that I needed to work on? And so that can also be really helpful. All right, so that brings us to the end of our of this workshop. So just to give a quick little recap, reading to write allows you to prepare for the essay while you're reading articles. So it helps you um, hit two birds with one stone. You want to make sure that you're utilizing at least 2 to 3 of these strategies while you're reading. I know that I listed a bunch of these strategies and they might seem a little overwhelming, but just know that you don't have to employ all of them. Find about 2 or 3 that work really well for you and try to utilize those while you're reading and while you're writing. And of course, utilize feedback from instructors, tutors, and friends, because all of that is going to assist you with improving your writing and making sure that you're turning in the strongest work possible. All right, so that brings us to the end of this workshop. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the Writing Support Center. Thank you.